Welcome to Burress Law Life and Friends podcast. Honored to introduce today's guest, the current district judge for the 380th Court, Judge Ben Smith.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Kind of, navigating the new normal with the courts, zooming along, as we like to say, pretty much since the end of March. So it's been a crazy year. It's been a difficult year, adjusting to all of the restrictions and precautions that are necessary. Make sure everybody's safe. But at the same time, we still have to move our cases. We still have to make sure that justice gets done in Collin County. So it's been a trying year, but I think that overall, the Collin County courts have done a remarkable job adjusting and still managing to efficiently administer over its cases.
So let's back up. Let's talk about you from the beginning. You're the son of a career serviceman in the Air Force. Is that right?
That's right. In fact, my dad was a disc jockey, and he enlisted in '68. He was in the Air Force for 20 years, and for much of my early childhood, he was a broadcaster for AFKN, American Forces Korean Network. He was a morning disc jockey.
Now, was he Korean?
He wasn't. He was, after he finished basic training in San Antonio, he was shipped out to Seoul. It was during the Vietnam War, but there were concerns that North Korea would take advantage of our conflict with Vietnam to invade the South. So we had a very strong force in South Korea as well. And so my dad was sent there, and there he met my mother, who was Korean. And they were married and had my sister, who's 2 years older than I. And then I came along. My sister was born in Seoul, and I was born 2 years later in Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay. So I'm assuming you're probably one of those guys who've lived all over the world.
Yes. That's kind of the life of the Air Force brat. I kind of think of that term as, an officer's kid. I was an enlisted man's kid, so I don't know if I would call myself an Air Force brat, but there's certainly an upside and a downside to that life. Typically, you move every 3 to 4 years. We lived in Seoul 2 different time periods from between, I believe, 3 to 4 years. Also lived in Michigan, Southern California, briefly in West Virginia, Maine, Spain, and Germany, all throughout my childhood during the 20 years of my dad's service. Then he retired and moved back to West Virginia, which is where he's from.
So at some point in time, I think you wind up in Boston University?
Yes.
How?
Before my parents divorced when I was 11, and my mom, we were living in Seoul at the time, and my mom moved to Maine. She had some relatives in close by in New Hampshire. And so me and my sister stayed with my dad. Then we were living near Los Angeles. I was going to Los Angeles Unified School District. I was in the 11th grade, and my dad announced that he was going to retire from the Air Force, and he hated California. He hated the traffic. He hated the smog. He's a small town kid, and he wanted to get back to a small town where he felt comfortable. But he hated LA. And so, but I'm in the middle of my junior year of high school at Los Angeles Unified. My dad says, I'm retiring and we're moving to West Virginia. And so being the kid that I was, I acted very defiantly, and I said, there's no way I'm moving to West Virginia. And so I actually ended up living the rest of my junior year of high school with my good friend. And then at the end of the school year, I had to make a decision whether I was going to go live in Maine with my mom, who I hadn't lived with since my parents got divorced, or if I was going to go to West Virginia with my dad. So continuing to defy my dad and his insensitivity, I moved to Maine with my mom and did my senior year at Thornton Academy, which is about as different from Los Angeles Unified as you could get.
I'd imagine.
and wanting to stay close to my mom and just kind of liking the area and falling in love with Boston, I decided to go to BU, which offered me a full ride, which was very important to me at the time because of financial concerns and just not knowing how I was going to pay my way through school.
I'm assuming you had really good grades to get a scholarship to Boston University.
I did. I finished second in my class, which
Okay.
I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I told my mom, she said, "Why didn't you finish first?"
Our experience diverges with your second in the class and I think 76, but just
I told my mom, thinking that she would be really pleased, but she was expecting first.
yeah.
But that's my mom. High expectations. But yes, I got the full ride to BU and lived within a stone's throw of Fenway Park for the duration, and then graduated in '96. Worked
What degree?
a Bachelor of Science. I went to the College of Communications.
Okay.
Actually, the degree itself was in broadcasting and film. So initially, I was an English major, and then at some point, I switched to the communications.
And you were a writer at some point, right?
I was an aspiring novelist or screenwriter.
You've never looked at a motion of mine and just said, "Oh gosh, this is terrible."
Not you, but there have
Okay.
been some others. I do love the craft of writing. I enjoy it immensely. I take real great pride in it, and I like to write my own jury charges. And although not like federal judges where they write, opinions, state district judges don't write opinions. We issue findings at times, but most of the documents that we issue and sign are prepared by the prevailing party in an action, and so there's not a lot of opportunity for most of us to write, I guess, what you'd call original legal writings.
Mm-hmm.
But on occasion, we do prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law. But it's not what you typically tend to see from an appeals court or from a federal district court, where you have a lengthy judicial opinion.
Yeah. I clerk for the Dallas Court of Appeals, and every now and then the justice that I work for would say, "Here's what I want the opinion to be. Figure out how to get there." Okay.
That's great.
It's always about truth here.
Absolutely.
So Boston, and then I think you go to law school at Boston, correct?
I did.
Okay.
I spent a couple of years. I worked as a technical writer. So I wrote some software manuals on enterprise software like PeopleSoft, SAP. And I thought it was the greatest thing in the world to get paid to write.
That's funny because every time I hear SAP from my software and technology buddies, I do this. Fall asleep.
Yeah, that's what I did a lot of that as well. Because you essentially I had to learn the software for the specific business it was being implemented with, and then try to translate the technical jargon as far as using the software into everyday language for the employees that would be using it. And it paid pretty well, but it wasn't the type of writing that I really was interested in doing. So I ended up going to law school about 3 years after I graduated from undergrad, and in my final semester, I did the study abroad program at Oxford, and that's where I met my wife,
Rebecca.
Right, and she was going to Abilene Christian University. She was still an undergraduate, and after I fell in love with her, I chased her to Texas, and we ended up moving to Austin and getting married in Austin.
And just to set the stage, I mean, this is where you married way, way, way up.
I did.
Okay. Yeah.
As did you, if I may say.
There is no question. Isn't that great?
It is. Yeah, I couldn't be more amazed at how much I married up.
Well, yeah. I mean, she was our first option for, a Smith guest. And she turned us down.
I don't blame you.
Well, it's actually Ben running for, judge once again. And you need to interview him. And maybe you can interview me about my business later. And I said, okay, well, if we've got it.
I'm so proud of her. She's the hardest worker I've ever known.
She's a small business owner. She used to be a teacher.
Yeah, she was a teacher for 10 years in elementary school at Frisco ISD and McKinney ISD, and then she opened up a cupcake shop in Prosper, where we live. She's also a realtor and a great mom.
And I'll tell you what, she's a big defender of yours too, because I know how these campaigns are. They can be vicious, and she is a big defender. I mean, she's not just the kind of woman that will stand beside her man. I know her well enough to know she will be in front of her man if necessary.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be a district judge if it wasn't for how much work my wife did in 2012 to help me get elected.
Sure.
And I think that's really a hallmark of our wives and our women, is that we like to think of men as being the protectors of their families, but when it comes down to it, if somebody comes after you or comes after your kids or complains about you, it's almost always our wives,
Mama Bear,
and our moms.
Yes.
That are the most aggressive and protective when it's needed to make things right, and that certainly describes Rebecca, my wife.
Absolutely, she's a wonderful woman. After law school, you become a prosecutor, but it's not Collin County; it's Kaufman.
Yes. So we got married in Austin, and it was impossible to get a job at a law firm. I had a job lined up in Boston that when I decided to chase after Rebecca and move to Texas, I gave up. But as you know, the way that most employment works at the big law firms is you kind of secure those in your second year. You work there for the summer, and if they like you, they make you an offer.
And there's a huge priority over Texas law school graduates too.
Right. And so it was very difficult to find a job, especially in Austin. And so I started applying across the state, and I was looking at DA's offices mostly, because a DA's office is where you can really cut your teeth as a lawyer if you're interested in trial work, because you're going to get a lot of trial experience really quickly. I think in my first year as a prosecutor, I probably tried 20 to 30 jury trials. So Kaufman County, the DA there was the first one that gave me a call and offered me an interview. So I drove out to Kaufman, offered me the job, I accepted. And so Rebecca and I moved to Dallas, and I worked there for about a year and a half. And that's when I moved over to Collin County, and we moved to McKinney.
Okay. So you work in McKinney for what, 7, 8, 9 years?
Yes, I was at the Collin County DA's office for about 7.5 years.
Describe the positions that you were in and the types of cases that you were trying.
Of course, you start out as a misdemeanor prosecutor, and usually you have a team of prosecutors assigned to each court, and it might be 2, it might be 3.
So lots of non-lawyers will be watching. So misdemeanors are what?
Misdemeanors are, by definition, crimes that are punishable by a fine or by confinement in the county jail for up to a year.
A first and second DWI.
Right. Possession of marijuana, burglary of a motor vehicle, and some theft cases, typically shoplifting or theft cases with a certain value under $1,500. And typically, what if you progress as a misdemeanor prosecutor, you're elected, you're promoted to a chief misdemeanor prosecutor, which means you're the chief over the other prosecutors assigned to that court, to the county court at law. Sort
of the supervisor, if you will.
Right. And then most misdemeanor prosecutors aspire to try felonies, hopefully within a year or so after beginning as a misdemeanor prosecutor. So I rose pretty quickly. I was very blessed, very privileged to move quickly up as a prosecutor. I was promoted to a felony prosecutor, I believe within a year and a half.
That's a big deal.
It is, and I was promoted to a felony chief. At one point, I was the second assistant district attorney. So you have the elected DA, you have a first assistant and a second assistant. I was a second assistant.
Who was the DA at the time, and who was the first? Was it Greg?
When I first started in 2004, it was John Roach Sr., and then when Greg Willis became the DA in 2011, I believe January 2011, I was still there, and I was a felony chief at that point.
I see.
And with felonies, during the time that I worked at the DA's office, it was pretty much just every type of felony I tried to a jury, I tried to judges. So with felonies, it's typically hard drugs, both possession and sale, robbery, burglary, sexual assault of children and adults, murder, intoxication, manslaughter, intoxication, assault. So the serious felony cases where the punishment is sentenced to state prison as opposed to county jail.
So at some point in time, you decide to make a run for district judge. You don't start with county, you start with district judge. What year is that election?
That was in 2012. Coming up at the end of 2011, I decided that I was going to resign from the DA's office and run for this bench. And the biggest reason for that is because the DA, Greg Willis, was perfectly amenable to me remaining in my job as I campaigned. But when I met with a campaign consultant, they told me, you don't really have any political capital because you haven't been involved in Collin County politics. And so she told me essentially that bottom line, the only chance you really have is if you quit your job and campaign full time, and that make campaigning your full time job.
What a tough decision to make.
It is, and it was really stepping out in faith because, and that was extremely difficult to do because I had 2 young children. I was providing for my family, and to know that I would be going months without a paycheck, not knowing when my next paycheck would be coming, was very stressful and very difficult.
Well, and from for the sake of the non-legal viewers, prosecutors don't earn what many of their colleagues earn in private practice.
Absolutely. When I started out in Kaufman County in 2003, my salary as a misdemeanor prosecutor, my starting salary was, I believe it was $35,000. And I thought, wow, this is great. Because when I was studying for the bar, I was making much less than, I think I was making $9 or $10 an hour for AT&T. Just trying to make ends meet as a newlywed. I think when I started in Collin County, the starting salary was maybe 50 or 55. So you're right. It doesn't particularly pay as well as a private attorney might get. But there's so much other reward, I think, that you get working in that job, which I believe to this day is a noble profession, and that does a good deal of the Lord's work in seeking justice and securing justice. And one of the things that always appealed to me about the law when I was growing up is, as a kid, you jump up and down and you say, that's not fair. That's not fair. In the world we live, whether we're children, we're adults, we see all sorts of injustice. And it seems like, people get away with bad things. For me, what was always appealing about the courtroom in particular was that's the one place in this world where you can obtain some measure of justice. It's not perfect. It doesn't restore somebody completely, But that's not going to be possible. Mm-hmm. But in the courtroom, you can bring some measure of justice, some measure of resolution to somebody who's been wronged. And to me, that was always the most appealing thing about becoming a lawyer. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to be in the courtroom because that's what, to me, being a lawyer was all about. To kill a mockingbird, and that sort of inspiration. I'm probably really dating myself, but when I was growing up, me and my dad, we were huge fans of LA Law, and we would watch that together every week. But that to me is, what being a prosecutor is all about is seeking justice, and I have so much respect for prosecutors and also defense attorneys who get a really bad rap for what they do, but they are really defending our system and defending our Constitution and defending due process and making sure that everybody is receiving due process and an equal application of law, so that when there is that person, whether they're guilty or innocent, when you get that innocent person, we're ensuring that they receive the same amount of due process and the same amount of fairness, because that's how we treat everybody.
And I love that you say that, because I'm sure that my defense lawyer buddies, when there's a new judge that essentially comes out of the prosecutor's office, they're probably wondering, gosh, am I going to get a fair shake? Why can't we get one who, comes from a successful, private practice? But so I think it's so important to have someone who's impartial.
Absolutely. And, the model for me was always Judge Kurt Henderson, because for many years as a prosecutor, I was assigned to his court. And I think that he, like many others, potentially Judge Mark Rush and Judge Scott Becker, everybody, the expectation, I think, is, at least initially, they're just going to be a prosecutor in a robe. Mm-hmm. But there's something about putting on the robe, for me personally, and it really reminds me of that role. Of being neutral, of being detached. And it's a reminder to me that once I put that thing on, I'm bigger than myself. And it's a reminder to me to put away my personal preferences, my personal politics, my personal beliefs, and apply the rule of law instead of the rule of Ben Smith, or what I think Ben Smith, should do, or
sure.
should rule on. I've tried to the best of my ability to do that with accused persons as much as with the prosecutor, and just be straight down the line, middle of the road. And I think other judges have as well, that have gone from the prosecutor's role to the judicial role. I think that it helped me a lot that after I resigned from the DA's office, even though I was campaigning most of the time, I still opened up a law practice, and I got on the wheel, as we call it, and did some criminal defense work, because I think it's really important to have that perspective from the other side, and I think that goes a long way to when you're putting on a black robe, to understanding each side of the aisle.
Sure, if you've done both sides. So you take the bench in 2012. Who is your predecessor?
Suzanne Wooten.
Okay.
So Suzanne Wooten had resigned, and so it was an open seat. And so initially there were 6 candidates who filed to run for the 308th District Court. And then there was a runoff, and I won the runoff. It was the crazy.
Were you up against Green?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It was Terry Green, Chip Jarvis, and Jody Johnson were the four. Two dropped out before the end of the filing period. But it was that crazy year where the redistricting litigation went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And so it delayed the primary. I believe it was the longest primary season in the history of Texas. Mm. It delayed the primary from early March until the end of May, and the runoff wasn't until the end of July.
Wow.
So it was a very long campaign. And as these things tend to get very ugly, toward the closer you get to the end, the uglier they tend to get. And so the campaign was difficult. But once I won the primary at the end of July, since the seat was vacant, Governor Perry appointed me to serve the remainder of my predecessor's unexpired term. So I was appointed at the beginning of August to serve the rest of that year. And then in January of 2013, I began the 4-year term I was elected to. And the reason the governor can do that is because in November, in that particular race, I did not have a Democrat opponent. So I was assured that I was going to be elected.
Sure. And then you you successfully are reelected in 2016, but I don't remember if you had an opponent or anything like that.
I did not have an opponent in 2016.
Which says something about your performance, frankly.
I hope so. But I think that Collin County has grown so much that it may not be realistic to expect that any Republican incumbents in 2020 going forward aren't going to have a Democrat opponent.
Totally agree. But at that time, I think it said something. So you've been on the bench 8 years. Any statistics that you know off the top of your head in terms of just efficiency of the court? Because you're known as an efficient judge. Your court is known as an efficient court. Any stats off the top of your head, just in terms of cases that are dispositive or just anything of that nature?
I believe I've disposed of, or the court has disposed of over 17,000 cases since I started. Now, when I began in 2012, this court had over 2,100 pending cases, which is high. And it took me quite a bit of time to get down to a more healthy number, which I would probably say 1,500 is about what you might think is. It's still high, but it's manageable. And from 2012 until the end of the fiscal year of 2019, over 2,000 cases were filed in the 380th District Court every month. Every year. And I believe at the end of the 2019 fiscal year, I had less than 1,300 pending cases.
Wow.
Which is difficult to do, but it was, I thought, a very high rate of efficiency and getting cases closed and resolved. Also, pretty soon after I started, one of the jobs that us judges have that people don't always know about is, because it doesn't always happen between 9 and 5, is that we get calls for warrants a lot.
Late into the night, right?
Yes. And it's difficult, but it's part of the job. And it might be in the middle of the night that we get a call from a detective or a police officer needing us to review an arrest warrant or a search warrant. So after I became a judge, I began getting contacted or called by various detectives and police officers, and so they want me to look at a warrant, and they say, well, where do I need to come? Where are you? And I was either at my house or maybe I was at a restaurant having dinner with my family, and they would come to me, and I would read over the affidavit and, if appropriate, sign the warrant. And at this time, technology was certainly available that I thought, this is really inconvenient for the detectives to have to come to where I am. and there are available means where we can make this a lot more convenient for them and to help them. And so I started partnering with law enforcement agencies in Collin County to set up a system where they could submit and I could review warrants electronically. And they prepare the affidavit and the warrant. They put it in the cloud, and then I retrieve it, I read it, and if appropriate, I sign it, and I put it right back in the cloud. And they don't have to leave the scene of the investigation or the crime. It's much more efficient for them. And over the course of, I would say, since I started that program 7 or 8 years ago, I've reviewed electronically over 8,000 warrants.
Wow.
And partnered with 26 law enforcement agencies. Because the thing with a state district judge is we have statewide jurisdiction. So of course, the judicial district is comprised of Collin County, and that's where we hold court. But if a detective from Austin wanted me to review a search warrant to search a house in Austin, a district judge can do that. And so not only have I partnered with many law enforcement agencies in Collin County, over 26, I believe, and also fire marshals and fire departments who are investigating arson cases. Also, several other law enforcement agencies like Dallas PD, there's a small portion of Dallas, the city of Dallas, in Collin County, but also Garland, Grand Prairie. There are all sorts of agencies in the surrounding areas that, for whatever reason, don't really have a system similar to ours set up in those jurisdictions. And so I guess they hear from other officers maybe at education conferences or training conferences, and they reach out to me, and I'm happy to try and help them. It really does get a little hard to handle sometimes because detectives, once they find a reliable judge and one that's accessible, they keep coming back to you. So it makes me very popular.
Yeah. I think that's great. I mean, you've got to embrace technology. So especially for our lay audience, give us an idea of the makeup of the type of cases that you hear percentage-wise, criminal, civil, family, and the like.
Initially, for most of the time since I began working as a judge, the 380th is a general jurisdiction court, so we hear just about everything except probate. I don't hear probate, and I don't hear juvenile, and I don't hear misdemeanors. So civil lawsuits with a minimum amount of in controversy, but no ceiling on an amount of controversy for a civil case. So it could be a personal injury lawsuit seeking millions of dollars in damages. Family law suits, so divorces, child custody and child support modifications, and enforcement suits where one side is suing the other because the other side isn't paying child support or letting the other parent see a child, and criminal felonies. And for the most part, I would say when I began for the first several years, I would probably put the percentages at 40, maybe 30 to 40% family, 30 to 40% criminal, and the rest civil. But in a lot of cases, I might say about 1/3 each. But as our population in Collin County has grown, we've created new district courts. And the last 4 that we've created have been specialized district courts. 3 of them are specialized in family law, and one of them, with Judge Burress, is specialized in civil law. And so when those courts went online, the general jurisdiction courts, of which there are 7, I believe, transferred some of our pending cases to those courts to alleviate our dockets, which were completely overloaded, transferred to those new courts, to give them a pending docket to work with.
And then you get more criminal and family in terms of percentage, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So because of of having the new specialized courts, at present, I would probably put the percentages at 60 to 70% criminal, and about 15 to 20% family, 15 to 20% civil.
Which again is just right in your wheelhouse, having that criminal background.
Yes, I mean, I enjoy. I really do like being a general jurisdiction court. There are aspects of each type of case that I find fascinating and interesting. But I think going forward, we're going to see that trend continue. Because if I'm not mistaken, Collin County is the largest county in the state of Texas that does not have all specialized courts. And so we're trending in that direction. And I think that as the county continues to grow, we're going to continue to see that until the 7 general jurisdiction courts are going to be primarily criminal district courts.
That's really interesting. Well, I've enjoyed having civil cases in your court. I know that's not exactly your background, but you certainly learned it as you've been on the bench, and you take a lot of time, and you have a lot of discernment, and it's always comforting to be in your court.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I enjoy the challenge. I think that being a judge is largely about temperament and attentiveness. It's kind of ironic, but until I became a judge, I didn't realize just how different the job is from being an advocate. And really, most of the job is completely opposite to that of the advocate. You have to trade your passion for dispassion. You have to trade talking a lot to listening a lot, primarily, because the job is a lot of listening.
Something I tell my 8-year-old son a lot, by the way. You got 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Right. Instead of appealing to a judge or a jury to make a decision, you have to make that decision, and it's difficult. And I didn't quite realize what I was in for until I actually was put into that role, and it's difficult. I mean, I think that a good judge is like a good lawyer. If you devote yourself, you can learn the law. A lot of times, the lawyers tell you what the law is. You just have to decide which one is right. But to me, it's not necessarily the subject matter. The subject matter is important, but what, in my view, is more important is how you conduct yourself and how you treat the litigants, treat the lawyers, how you make your rulings. I don't think that anybody likes the idea of going in front of a judge and the judge making a decision based on which lawyer he thinks is better, or making a decision based on the judge's personal preferences or what the judge thinks ought to happen, or making a decision based on which of the lawyers contributed to that judge's campaign.
But what about good looks and great hair?
For me, once I put the robe on, it's all about the law. And so, to me, what I liked most when I was a lawyer, what I wanted most from a judge is predictability. Because if I know how that judge is going to rule, I can respond appropriately, and in a lot of cases avoid continued litigation, because I can tell the client, or I can tell my victim, this is what's going to happen if we go to trial. But to me, in order to gain predictability as a judge, you have to be consistent in following the rules and the law, because that's what lawyers can track to predict what you're going to do.
everything comes back to sports analogies as guys, right? And if you're playing baseball, all you want the umpire to do, you just want to know what the strike zone is, right?
Right.
You just want to have an idea of what are they going to call the balls, and when are they going to call the strikes?
Right.
That's what you want.
Because the alternative is if each judge is going to rule according to their personal preferences or their beliefs or who they think the better lawyer is, it's a crapshoot. I mean, depending on who you're before on that particular day, you're subject to the whims of that individual, and there's no way that you can be able to confidently predict any outcome. And it kind of throws the whole system of justice from the rule of law to the rule of men and women in robes, and just hoping that you get in front of one that's going to go your way. As a victim's attorney, a personal injury attorney, what do you look for in a judge? What do you think your colleagues look for in a judge?
I think our colleagues look for a judge who can make a ruling. There was actually a mandamus opinion that came out today, and it was and this is unusual, but it's pretty critical of a certain judge who just sat on these motions and didn't make any rulings. And that's very unusual to sort of call out, the judge. But I don't think you want to have a reputation as someone who takes every single issue under advisement.
Right.
But yet, if a motion, may state the parties are set to mediate in 2 weeks, and it lays it out, and then you lay out the arguments. I mean, maybe that's a tell that there's a good chance this case may resolve in 2 weeks unless there's an adverse ruling. So, I think timing is really important. Right. I think, when you have an opportunity to resolve a case. So I think there are times to make rulings, and then there's certain timing issues, and sometimes, motions are filed just because they need to be out there. It's the threat of filing a motion. But other times, we really need to know a result so that we know how to proceed. We know what the case value is. And I'll tell you one more thing. You mentioned temperament earlier, and that is so important to me. And I know that they may not admit it, but I know a lot of other lawyers would agree with me off the record. These cases are stressful. My wife sees the amount of stress that it puts on me. And I don't care if it's what most would think is a minor motion that we're arguing, or if it's a motion for summary judgment, or if it's a trial. If the judge doesn't have a good demeanor, if the judge is not kind to the attorneys and not understanding, that's a very tough thing, because I think, no matter how much experience, I have almost 20 years, you still walk in and a client's, in my case, their financial lives are resting in my hand. They may have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions in medical expenses. And I live and die with each ruling. And and the last thing you want is a judge yelling, belittling you. And the fact is, certain judges have reputations for having a lack of temperament, and others, such as yourself, have a reputation for just having an excellent temperament. And I think those judicial polls bear out in your favor there. And I have to tell you, I've been in front of you. I have not been in front of you a lot, but when I have, you're so kind, you're such a gentleman, and you take time in evaluating an issue and delivering the correct ruling. And the job is hard enough. Always have a lot of respect for, any hardworking lawyer. And the last thing that a lawyer needs, I mean, remember, our rate of alcoholism is off the charts compared to other professions. The last thing that a lawyer needs is to feel like that he's on the business end of a bad-tempered judge.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I really tried to be mindful of, because I think that all of us, when we're lawyers, we've either been the victim of that or we've been the witness to it on to the other side of just a judge kind of dressing down a lawyer in front of their clients, in front of the public proceeding. And I just think that there are certainly times when I have to redirect a lawyer or tell one that I think they're going below the line. But I try to do it in private during a break or outside of the proceeding, and not in front of their clients, not in front of other people. And I think and I agree that it's so important as a judge to treat every litigant, every lawyer, having in mind the dignity of those proceedings, which I attribute so much sanctity to, and as difficult as the decisions are, to being decisive and to being firm with the decision once you made it, but being thoughtful and being cautious before reaching it. One of the things that would always grate on me as an attorney is when it was obvious a judge was trying to avoid making a decision. So, you make an objection, and what I want to hear as a lawyer is sustained or overruled, right? And and you go until you hear no. And that, to me, that's always the telltale sign that I'm hearing a good lawyer, is when they know that they know how to preserve error and they're going forward until they hear the no from the judge. The judges sometimes that I was in front of as a lawyer from time to time, they would avoid saying sustained or overruled to an objection. They would say, move along, counselor, or ask your next question, and avoiding that. And as a lawyer, watching some of my colleagues, watching some peers, I would see that lawyer that would persist, and they'd say, Your Honor, with all due respect, I request a ruling on my objection. And I wondered initially, why are they doing that? Why are they insisting on having a ruling? And then I understood, because that's a really good lawyer, and they know exactly what they're doing. And once they have that ruling, if it's adverse to them, they preserved error. They can appeal that issue. But you have to keep going if the judge gives you a favorable ruling. So the judge says sustained. Judge, I respectfully ask the jury be instructed to disregard that last question and answer. The judge instructs the jury. So again, the judge has ruled favorably. So you have to keep going. Respectfully request a mistrial. That's denied. You finally heard no. And so, the jury and some of the people watching the trial, they're like, that jerk, he's trying to get a mistrial, not quite understanding exactly. The attorney doesn't really want a mistrial, but they have to keep going in the process before and hear the judge say no or rule against them. Because if the judge gives you what you want, you haven't preserved anything, and you can't appeal it later and say that the judge messed up, which is the basis of an appeal. Yeah,
and this is I think it's pretty high level stuff at this point, and I think our lawyers will understand it. Our lay people won't, but you're right. I mean, I've had rulings go my way, and I have later conceded the issue because I did not want to put my judge in a position to get reversed when I thought there's a likelihood of that happening. Because from my standpoint, number one, I want to protect my judges, and I certainly don't want to get reversed later and have an issue that's I think it's the old saying of winning the battle but losing the war, and
right.
And you don't want to do that. So, so you're running for re-election. This will be your second
I'm running for my third term. So
it's your third term, but it's your second reelection.
Yes. Second reelection.
Okay.
4-year terms.
Yep. And, the fact is, I think you could probably clearly earn more if you went into private practice, especially as a longtime district judge. But you're not doing that. So I guess the question is, what motivates you to want to continue serving the Collin County residents in this way?
To be honest, I wonder that myself sometimes after a difficult day.
I told you we had to be honest. We had to be.
I mean, it's a stressful job, and the decisions are really hard. And sometimes I question how long I want to continue doing it. But it's important work. It's meaningful work. And to me, it is so important that whoever is in those roles be the right person to wield that power and that authority. It's a great responsibility. It's a great public trust. And I think that it's a real honor to be trusted with that authority and that responsibility, and to do my best to try and make sure that it's done the right way and with integrity. So I don't know how long I'll continue to want to do the job, because, like I said, it is tough, it is difficult, but I'd like to continue doing it for as long as I believe that I care about the decisions that are made. I care about the people that are there, and how the decisions are going to affect them. And I think that with some elected offices, longevity or continued service or multiple terms is not necessarily a good thing. But I think that with judges, it's a different story. I think that experience is especially important when it comes to our judges, especially in the period that we're in with COVID, and not just COVID, but I mean, you can check all the boxes for this year. It's health crisis, check. Economic crisis, check. Social crisis, check. Environmental crisis, check. As we enter the new year, I think the prospect of having new district judges that don't have any judicial experience, that are going to require a significant amount of time to learn the job and to do the job before they can do it adequately and efficiently, I think it's a really bad, especially bad time to have that kind of a transition. I think that going forward into the new year, as we're continuing with these restrictions and requirements that we do a lot of proceedings remotely when possible, I think that it's that much more important for us to retain the judges that we have if they've proven that they're doing a good job running an efficient court, they're competent in the law, and they're being a fair and impartial jurist. I think it's especially important in this election, more than any other, that we retain the Republican judges in Collin County.
And, along those lines, the support that you have is just tremendous. I don't know all of them, but, I know that you have the support of the McKinney Police Department. I know you're endorsed by the Frisco Police Department. I know you're endorsed by the Collin County Deputies Association. I know that Mayor George Fuller supports you. I know that many others, including a lot of the Collin County attorneys like myself, endorse you. How does that make you feel to have such a tremendous amount of support based on your record?
It's an honor. And it's humbling. All of the police associations that have endorsed. So, like you said, Frisco, McKinney, Richardson, Dallas, Allen. I don't know. Actually, Allen has not endorsed this cycle. Mayor Fuller, the mayor of Prosper, my town.
Ray Smith.
Yes, Ray Smith, no relation.
Yeah.
It's an honor. I think that, especially because judges, we have to go through a very political process to become elected to do a very non-political job. And that's in many ways awkward and uncomfortable. We have to be political so that we can do a job where we're supposed to be completely apolitical. And we can endorse other candidates. We can't use our name to benefit anyone, right? And so to me, that makes it all the more flattering and complimentary when a politician, a police association, a citizen, a lawyer, knowing that I could never return the favor, would endorse my candidacy or my continuing service as a judge. With lawyers, it's very encouraging, especially when it's lawyers that you've ruled against, because, like I said, I don't think that ruling in a lawyer's favor is what will garner a lawyer's support. It's that you were fair to that lawyer, to that litigant, that you let them be heard, and whether or not the ruling went their way, they're able to walk away from it knowing that they were given a fair opportunity to present their case and to be heard, and that the lawyer, even though they didn't rule in your favor that time, that there's going to be a next time, and they know that they're going to be treated well and fairly in that case as well. And so that means a lot.
Anything you want to get off your chest?
Well, I just like to encourage everybody to vote. I mean, we've all heard it before that, this is the most important election of our lives, but I really believe this one is, at least the most important one of my lifetime. And if you look at the results, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, with judicial races, the system that we have that's in our state constitution is that judges are elected by the people in partisan elections. And so having that R by our name or a D by their name, it's not quite the same thing as when you see an R or a D by a senator's name or a president's name. It means something very different. And what it means is a Republican judge believes in following the rule of law and making it apply in the same way to everybody without regard to our personal beliefs or preferences. And I think that is so important. And so when you go to vote in this election, there's no more straight ticket voting. You have to go, if you want to vote in the judicial races, you have to go all the way down to the bottom of the ballot. And so regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat or how you feel about President Trump or candidate Biden, wherever you are in that, the judicial races are so important because they're local. They affect you. They affect your neighbors. They affect your community. And they're extremely important. But just regardless of where you fall in those races higher on the ballot, please educate yourself and be mindful of those races on the lower ballot, and please go and vote in those races. And if you agree with me that it's important to retain judges with experience who will follow the law without regard to personal preference, then I hope that you'll go down and support your Republican judges on the ballot on November 3rd in Collin County.
Well, for sure. And, I've got my feet on the ground, and I have many, 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 many. I mean, the secret is most lawyers are Democrat. They're not Republicans. I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I have so many friends who are voting for for you because they just see that level of discernment, that level of care, just a tremendous temperament, probably the best temperament this side of Jill Willis, on the bench. It's just, just remarkable. So
thank you.
I think that's fantastic. Let's finish with something fun.
Okay.
All right. I always like to talk about something fun. Let's talk about music. So you're driving home. I mean, what might we see or hear on your Pandora or Spotify playlist?
I've always kind of been an alt rock, alt country guy. Probably not an alt country guy so much before I moved to Texas. But I like bands like Spoon out of Austin. I don't know if you ever heard of Spoon. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of Beck. I love classic stuff. I love when I was younger, a teenager, I was a big Beatles fan, Led Zeppelin fan, Rolling Stones fan. I love those bands. I love Willie Nelson.
If you didn't like Willie, we would not air this. I'm just kidding.
I was always a big fan. I was a really big fan of Ryan Adams until he got kind of outed with some accusations. But I always thought that he's kind of alt country. Okay. But I really enjoyed his music, and I always have a soft spot for Bob Dylan, even though everybody hates his voice. The man is a brilliant songwriter. And my son, who's now 14, recently has really gotten me into Billy Joel. And so over the past year, I've listened to a lot of Billy Joel, and I love his music. My son's been taking piano since he was 3. And he loved, actually we surprised him for his birthday last October, and we took him to a Billy Joel concert in Dallas. Was it Dallas or Arlington? But The Stranger is an amazing piece of work. One of his albums, Turnstiles, that album, it's beautiful. I highly recommend Turnstiles by Billy Joel. But yeah, I kind of I like to think of my tastes as eclectic, okay. But I would say primarily, alt rock. I'm a big Foo Fighters fan as well. I love the Foo Fighters a lot more than I like Nirvana. But yeah, I'd say classic rock, alt country.
All right, I can't wait to try the Billy Joel albums that you talked about. I like Billy Joel. I'm not a huge fan, but I can't wait to try those couple. Say it again. What are the names?
The Stranger.
The Stranger. All right.
And Turnstiles.
Okay. Well, we all have to check that. I'm going to give you one.
Okay.
Ryan Bingham, Bingham. If you've seen Yellowstone,
I have seen a few episodes. Okay. Kevin Costner.
Ryan Bingham was a big character on Yellowstone. He hated what was going on there. He thought it was a very evil place, and he ends up losing. But he was the one who was playing guitar most of season, I think, 1 and 2. So Ryan Bingham, Bingham.
Right. Check out Ryan Bingham.
All right. And then finally, hobbies. And I ask you, because we're in kind of the same spot. We've got kids and this sort of thing. And when people ask me my hobbies, I'm like, well, I love to climb mountains. Ben, I've climbed 2 mountains in like 12 years. I love to snow ski. I've snow skied like 4 times. I love to play golf. It's 3 times a year. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, family just takes a ton of time. What are you into outside of work?
I'm a family man, and I try to spend as much time with my family as I can. During this COVID pandemic, that's been pretty easy to do. I like to swim. I like to read. Although ever since getting into law, my reading has dropped off a lot. Not so much fiction anymore. A lot more nonfiction. A lot more audiobooks while I'm driving. But
now, is that because of the time commitment, or is it just because you're tired of reading because you already read so much.
Yeah, because by the time I get home and, I cook a lot. I'm the primary cook in our house, and, hang out with the family, get the kids in bed. By that point, I'm practically a pumpkin, so it makes it more difficult. But I also really like to spend my time on various DIY home projects, which is just like an endless list. I like to try things out first, and then if I can't, if I realize this is too big for me or I can't do it, that's when I'll reach out to a professional. If it's electrical or if it involves plumbing or something like that. But I like to take on a lot of projects at home. I'm trying to learn about cars, but that's really difficult. But for the most part, I have been, and I tend to be a homebody. So hanging out with my kids, playing chess with my son. I'm a big movie buff. I love movies. I love Christopher Nolan. I thought that Tenet just kind of blew my mind. Yes, I was stupid. I went to the movie theater to see Tenet. I couldn't help myself because I love Christopher Nolan. I just love all of his movies, from Memento to the Batman trilogy to Inception. I just think he's fantastic, and he's the type of movie maker that blows my mind. So I have to watch the movie several times before I really think I understand everything that's in it, which I think falls perfectly within his trap, because the more times we watch it, the more money he's going to make. But I love his movies, and so as much as I can, I try to get a movie in, which is hard when you have young kids, because you can't necessarily watch whatever you want to watch because it's not appropriate. And sometimes I've made the fatal mistake of misremembering a movie, thinking that it's rated PG, there's nothing wrong with it, so I put it on with the family. And I think a few months ago that the movie happened to be Ferris Bueller, which is a movie that I love, and it's one of my all-time favorites. But until you actually watch it, because you haven't watched it in 10 years or 20 years, you have no idea how much is in it that you really don't want your 9-year-old to see or hear. And then, you feel like you're a horrible parent and you really mess things up. But yeah, that's kind of been, I think, life in the times of COVID, the past 6-7 months, is learning all of your failures as a parent, because of all the amount of time that we've been spending at home.
No question. Well, let's end with a big finish. It takes money to run a campaign. These campaigns are aggressive. What's the website? How do you donate to the campaign to keep? I'll just tell you, we're talking about one of the highest rated. The local attorneys are polled, and we're talking about one of the highest rated judges on the bench. How can we help? What's the website? How do we donate?
It's keepjudgesmith.com. As everybody can imagine, campaigns are really expensive. Mail pieces are really expensive, primarily because of postage, and even sending just to targeted households, that adds up really quickly. You have to buy signs, you have to buy push cards, you have to knock on doors, you have to do all those things, and most of them take money to do them. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but every little bit adds up and helps. So whether it's $25, $50, or $500, it all helps to accomplish those things. So if you are able and you're willing to, you can donate online at keepjudgesmith.com.
And let me tell you something. If I just got a call from you saw it actually happen, but I just got a call from a personal injury client whose son has a criminal law issue that just happened. Big deal. These family law issues happen and no one expects it. If you don't have qualified judges, It's terrible for a community. So we have got to support our good local judges. Thank you for being a guest. Appreciate the time. I think we should end with a COVID almost fist bump.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.